내가 4살째인가 그런가 봐. 유엔군들이 들어왔어요, 부산에. 그러니까는 뭘 할까? 유엔군들한테 공연을 하자. 그래서 한 20-30명씩 그룹을 짜가지고 가서 공연을 한 거예요. 그렇게 돼서 이제 8군이라는 쇼가 생긴 거죠. 8군에서 제가 할 수 있다는 게 고마웠죠. 삶의 그 자체였겠죠.
The first glimpses of Korean rock started at these 8th Army bases. It was here that the first generation of Korean rock stars got their start, performing for UN soldiers stationed in South Korea. During the late 50s and early 60s, Shin Jin-hyun recorded his first album. Even though Shin Jin-hyun is considered the godfather of Korean rock music, his first album is far different from any Korean rock album that would come after. This record was, like a lot of popular music in army bases at the time, inspired by jazz and its use of brass instruments. This type of music would usually be performed by big bands, however, that was to change very soon.
처음으로 이제 이그 소그룹, 쉽게 말하자면 아주 작은 그런 그룹을 갖고 쇼를 만들었는데 그게 한국 최초의 이제 우리가 패키지 쇼라고 그렇게 말을 하죠.
현재 미국에서 최근에 제일 히트하는 게 뭐야? 이걸 알아야 돼. 그래서 그러면 여기 또 자료가 없어, 판이나 이런 게. 그러면 우리 그때 지하이들 친구들 있잖아. 그러면 부탁해 양담배 사주고 막 이래가지고 너 휴가 마다가 갈 때 올 때 이거 좀 사다 나오. 그래가지고 갔다 올 때 사가지고 오는 거야. 오디션 볼 때 딱 하면 카스토리안들이 그랬지. 그러면 이제 A 클래스 막 이렇게 받는 거지.
그래서 그때 이제 우리 키보이스 5명하고 여자 1명 그렇게 하죠. 락앤키라고 해가지고서 이제 그 성형난이 되는 그 어머니께서 우리 이제 매니저를 이제 하셔가지고 그분이 이제 인비 8군에다가 저희들을 이렇게 추천을 해가지고서는 연습을 시켜서 그래가지고 한국 최초로 이제 오디션을 보게 된 거죠. 예, 오디션을 볼 때 처음 패키지 쇼로서는 한국에서 처음 오디션을 봤는데 처음 볼 때 저희가 스페셜 A 클래스를 받았어요. 네.
The Keyboys were the first rock band to release a record. Released during July of 1964, the band's genre leaned more towards pop than rock. The album was mostly made up of covers and some originals written by outside songwriters. Like many bands that would follow them, the Keyboys were heavily influenced by the Beatles.
그룹을 우리가 만들어서 이렇게 하다 보니까는 그 비틀즈하고 그 말하자면은 그 구성이 비슷하더라고요. 그래서 이게 그렇다면 우리도 그러면 이게 우리가 한국의 비틀즈라고 하는 어떤 그런 걸 하나의 그 닉네임을 갖고 그러면 일반인에게 그렇게 시작을 하자.
5 months after the release of the historically important first Keyboys album, an even more legendary record would be released to the public.
빗속의 여인이 나올 때 그 음반은 그냥 음반을 만들어서 바로 시판을 한 게 아니고 음반을 찍기 전에 음반 발표회를 해요. 그때 당시에 음반 발표회라는 거는 상상도 못할 때예요, 한국에서는. 근데 신중현이라는 사람은 그렇게 앞서간 거예요.
락이라는 거는 사람을 흥분시키는 거 아니에요. 락이라는 것 자체가. 정말 이렇게 한국도 이런 곡을 가지고 이렇게도 할 수 있구나 하는 거를 나는 그때 놀란 거예요, 사실. 제가 놀랐어요. 한국 곡 갖고도 이게 되는구나, 이렇게가. 와, 이렇게도 나갈 수가 있구나. 저는 사실 놀랐어요. 그 정도로 저는 사실 신중현 씨를 참 감동을 한 거죠, 그때.
The first album by the Ad4 was entirely made up of original compositions by Shin Jung-hyun. Even a lot of Western bands at the time couldn't fill up a whole 14-track record with original songs, but Shin Jung-hyun had done it. The whole record was supposedly recorded in one take with one microphone at a small studio. However, this innovative album went unnoticed by the public for many years. Perhaps due to the failure of this album, Shin stopped making albums with only original compositions for a while, and although the Ad4's shows were constantly selling out, it did little to help the situation. Around 1965, the band released another record, however this time the album was entirely made up of surf rock inspired instrumental covers. Not every band was fortunate enough to create a studio album. In fact, some never even thought about making one. We knew album making as something only for singers, so we weren't disappointed that we never made an album. We thought of ourselves as a band, and we thought bands couldn't make albums. Thus, many bands from 60s Korea never made albums. Groups like Babos, Kimchi's, and the Elephant Brothers never released any music outside of performing live. However, some did release records as a backing band.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 맹꽁이 가지고는 안 돼. 사람 웃기네. 사람 웃기네.
This record is the only thing the Shouters ever recorded. The album features the band backing a singer called Chungwon, whilst playing cover versions of rock songs. Although rock groups releasing albums in Korea during the 60s were few and far between, there were still solo artists covering and singing rock songs. Many of these singers tended to be more popular than bands, as musicians could be more flexible with the genres they sang. Johnny Lee, who sings rock covers on the second Key Boys album, only managed to get a hit after singing a trot song. Similarly, Kim Young-guk, who the Ad4 backed for an album, also later went on to sing trot songs. Trot was the predominant genre in South Korea at the time, and many rock singers had to switch styles to earn a living. Whilst the Western world was experiencing the psychedelic summer of love, there wasn't much going on in the South Korean rock scene. The bands that pioneered Korean rock had all but fizzled out. The Ad4 had broken up, and Shin Jung-hyun was making surf rock-inspired music. The Key Boys members had left the band by that point, and only one founding member remained. However, these weren't the only rock groups in South Korea during the 60s.
저는 그냥 처음 나오자마자 다크하이스라는 그룹을 만들었어요. 그게 64년도에 제가 고등학교를 졸업했거든요. 근데 졸업하면서 바로 연습을 했어요. 그래가지고 신문 광고에 내가지고 멤버를 모집을 했어요.
Five Fingers are another band that managed to release multiple records during the 60s despite their lack of popularity. Released during the late 60s, the band could still be seen sporting Beatles-style clothes and hairdo. Despite this, some psychedelic numbers can still be heard on their records, such as their cover of Painted Black and Sloop John B.
새카만 우산 쓰고 걸어가는 연인 연인은 언제나 검은빛을 좋아해.
Many more bands went unnoticed for decades, as a majority of them did not have any surviving audio recorded by the groups. The only evidence of these bands ever existing are from rare photographs and word of mouth. During the late 60s, Shin Jin-hyun was giving lessons for a female duo called the Pearl Sisters. However, his ongoing struggles with the lack of success he was getting with his music made him want to move to Vietnam and perform there instead, like a lot of other Korean musicians had done.
한 6개월 정도 레슨 하다가 그 펄스타즈가 이제 저하고 이제 헤어지게 됐고 이제 저는 이제 월남을 계약했기 때문에 이제 가려고 했는데 이제 그 기념판이라도 하나 만들고 헤어집시다 이제 이래서 그냥 이제 판을 만들었죠.
멀리 떠난 내니마 언제나 돌아오려나.
그래서 막 새벽에 한 6시 정도 되는데 막 두드려요. 잠자고 있는데 그래서 들으면서 뭐 떴어 신형 떴어 뭐 이러고 들어가더라고. 그래서 아니 뭐가 떴냐고 새벽같이 뭐가 떴냐고 그랬더니 판이 이제 그 히트가 쳤다.
This gave Shin Jin-hyun confidence to make more records in Korea, but this time he would write songs for other singers instead of making an album with his band. This sudden boost helped Shin launch several artists during the late 60s, such as the Pearl Sisters, Kim Chu-ja, and Lee Jung-hwa, with all these records now having a slight psychedelic sound to their songs. The era of Beatles copy bands was ending. The most popular band from this genre, the Keyboys, were in a sorry state. The lead singer Cha Jung-rak and bassist Cha Do-gyun had both left to pursue solo careers. Lead guitarist Kim Hong-tak and drummer Yoon Hyang-gi also left the group to join other bands, leaving the only remaining member Ok Sung-bin to find new musicians. This new version of the Keyboys created more psychedelic music with the help of outside songwriters. And after Ok Suk-bin left the group in late 1969, the band was essentially a completely different group. After leaving the Keyboys, lead guitarist Kim Hong-tak was invited to join E5. The band leaned more towards a harder psychedelic sound with louder guitars and songwriting that resembled Western rock music at the time. People called their music soulful and psychedelic. By 1969, several acts had been established that would change the course of Korean rock history. The band, now known as the Keyboys, were constantly winning awards during contests. E5 would soon evolve into E6, and the band would start making more commercial and experimental music. Yoon Hyang-gi, the drummer from the Keyboys, eventually formed a group called the Key Brothers, a group that would start making Latin-influenced rock music during the early parts of the 1970s. Shin Jin-hyun would become more popular than ever, with almost every album of his becoming a hit, and he would start pushing for more psychedelic sound in his music. And most importantly of all, more and more bands started making original music, releasing albums, and pushing the boundaries of the rock genre.
우리나라 대중음악이 이제 지금 굉장히 발전했잖아요. 그래서 뭐 K-팝이라면 세계적인 장르가 돼가고 있고, 대중음악 발전에 가장 그 뒷걸음이 되고, 또 가장 그 지금 K-팝이 이렇게 세계적인 음악이 될 때까지 어떤 그 그냥 창조적인 그런 음악들, 이런 것을 가장 많이 한 게 그룹이거든요.
Korean bands in the 60s created innovative music, and their creativity and talent shined through despite their lack of resources. Groups often played with cheap gear during the 60s, and even had to record all their music with one microphone in one take. However, they created great music despite this. Music might have been more experimental and innovative during the 1970s and beyond, but it is hard to argue that, without rock groups of the 60s, Korean rock music might not have evolved to what it is today.
하고 싶은 말 너무나 가슴이 아파